Bob Costas, Hall of Fame broadcaster, and MLB Network has launched a new series. It's called Sounds of Baseball, co-hosted by Bob and Tom Verducci. And you look back on some of the greatest calls, moments from great broadcasters. Vin Scully was featured first, Jack Buck, Bob Uecker, and others will follow. Bob joining us on the program. Good morning, Bob. How's your morale?
Not too bad. Not too bad. All things considered, we're kind of getting used to it, just waiting it out and seeing what's going to happen.
But you're waiting for baseball to come back. What do you do all day?
Well, I've been able to read more outside sports and outside preparation than I used to, because there isn't that much to prepare for. We spend so much time, I'm sure we're very much alike in this respect, reading newspapers, reading magazines, not enough time to delve into books. And over the last many weeks, I've been able to do that. I'm doing what a lot of people are doing, catching up on stuff that's on Netflix or old movies or whatever it may be. And, that's pretty much it. Watching some of the archival games that show up on the all sports networks. And what you just mentioned is one of the great labors of love ever. I don't know if you were able to catch it. I'm sure they'll repeat it. The 2 hours with Vin Scully drew such a response. During the Last Dance or whatever, I'd hear from a lot of people because that was being watched by millions of people. But the response to this, among whatever size audience happened to catch it on a Monday night on MLB Network, really shows that Vin is in a category all his own. And the way people respond to this kind of programming, it's nostalgic, but it's also new. It's just a different way in. It's not just a series of clips and highlights. We try to get to kind of the mosaic of what made him different and what made him tremendous. And there's so much baseball history going back to 1950 and so much broadcasting history, really. And I hope we provided some insight into that beyond just here's a great play or here's a great game and here's a great call of it.
We talked about this, I think, the last time we talked, that social media would probably be very critical of Vin Scully. I mean, they're critical of everybody here, but to have that kind of voice. And would we allow a voice like that now in baseball or in sports?
I don't know that he could flourish on network TV if that's where he landed first. In fact, one of the points we made, and maybe I told you this story on one of our other visits at some point along the way, Dan, one of the points we made was that Dodger telecasts in the last 20 years or so, when he was just doing games, mostly home games because he wasn't traveling that much anymore, those telecasts were directed and produced from the inside out. He didn't have to follow graphics and production elements. They followed him with rare exceptions. And I mentioned on this special one occasion where he was telling a story about Don Zimmer, who had only passed away a few days before. And in the middle of it, Scott Van Slyke of the Dodgers gets hit by a pitch. Big deal. The benches didn't empty. He wasn't beamed. He didn't charge the mound. He goes down to first base. No matter how good the producer or director, if that happens today in any baseball game, they show it from 3 or 4 different angles. But that would have truncated Vin's story. He just noted that Van Slyke had been hit. He goes down to first base. He continues with this 4 or 5 minute remembrance of Don Zimmer. And even the network games, and there are plenty of them on this special that Tom and I did about Vin, even the network games are less cluttered than they are now. Some of the games the archival games that I did in the 1990s that have been played on the Major League Baseball Network, you can't help but notice, if you have any interest in broadcasting, how relatively uncluttered they are. Are there replays when necessary? Yeah. Are there graphics? Yeah. But you don't need a pitch box and a strike zone box on every single play. You don't need to perform an autopsy on every ground ball to shortstop. And that allows a broadcast to breathe and allows a broadcaster to do whatever he is most able to do.
You look at Bob Uecker's career, and he was a novelty when he was on with Carson, and he was so self-deprecating. Light beer commercials, it's one of those where you go, how did this happen? But it happened. Like Dick Vitale happened. If you said, hey, this guy's going to be a star, like, why did Bob Uecker resonate with people, not only locally, but nationally?
Well, first of all, he's just so damn funny. When you think of the Major League movies, Major League 3, even Uecker says you should forget about. But Major League 1 was fantastic. Major League 2 was good. And Uecker is a huge reason why. He's the guy who stitches the whole thing together, and he ad-libbed at least half of it. They'd give him just a general script, and he'd think of funny things to say. Carson was only a so-so baseball fan, but he loved Uecker. Many people who played with him on the Braves or the Cardinals or the Phillies say to this day that he's the funniest person they've ever been around, and he's just that funny in person, even funnier in some respects than he is on the air. But here's what a lot of people miss. If they only know him from Johnny Carson or the Major League movies or the commercials, he's just straight up a really good baseball announcer. You listen to his calls of big plays for the Brewers, he's on top of the game. It's different than Scully. You know, Vin and others, I tried to prepare as hard as I could. Al Michaels, you know, you prepares by going to the clubhouse, hanging around the batting cage, goes upstairs, takes a look at the game notes that they hand out in the press box, fills out a lineup card, and just wings it. But his broadcast, even if he wasn't as funny as he is, his broadcasts are first rate, and he's 86 years old.
Talking to Bob Costas, I know we keep talking about baseball. I said it's kind of a verbal game of ping pong. Back and forth we go, and I don't know where we end up, but it feels like 75, something in that area feels like common ground here. But the back and forth being made public, it feels like baseball everything's leaked out. Like where the NBA kept everything quiet for about 3 weeks, and now they're on the verge of coming back. I don't know what the strategy is of Major League Baseball or the Players Association, but if you were going to be an arbitrator here, mediator, how would you bring both sides together?
Well, one of the things you'd have to point out is they're moving toward, if it makes that much difference to the players, to be able to say that they won some sort of nominal victory by saying we're getting prorated, 100% prorated, or some portion close to 100% of what would have been prorated. If it's that important to them, figure out what the actual pool of money would be under any of these other proposals. And if you needed to save face to say that you got the prorated portion, we're just going to keep calibrating it until we get to the number where you can claim that victory and walk away. You know, these two sides seem determined to drive off a cliff. And they seem yet again determined, and I thought it might have been better because they hadn't had a work stoppage in a long time. I thought there was a better relationship. But there's so much lasting mistrust between the sides. It's been passed down through the generations. And I think it's particularly true of the players at this point, more so than the owners and the commissioner. Historically, the players were right. I don't think either side can claim any moral high ground in this situation. You know, the players talking about we were promised prorated. But it specifically says in the agreement that they struck in spring training when COVID-19 first hit that if they had to play without fans, they would revisit it. Then they claim, oh, this will establish some sort of revenue sharing or backdoor salary cap for the future. What kind of claim is that? Mm-hmm. Do the owners intend to play without fans in the future? Do they intend to play with teams competing only in their own time zones? These are all one-offs. These are all just for now. And what you're pointing out is correct. Not only is the bickering making them look bad, but if, in fact, that bickering keeps them from playing at all, or if it reduces them to a number of games that would be a mockery, because we know that baseball is different from basketball or hockey or even football in that respect. You need some representative number of games to say that, okay, we've determined, even in this one-off season, we've determined that that's enough to launch a postseason from there. The Nats were 19-31 after 50 games last year, and they wound up winning the World Series. You got to play a representative number of games before there's any authenticity at all, even in a unique season like this. And the big picture, a year from now, they're going to have to sit down and hammer out another CBA. And no matter who walks away from the table now and says, well, I guess we got the better of this negotiation, if the business itself is damaged, then everybody is damaged. And if the business thrives, then everybody does better. The owners won some concessions in the last couple of negotiations, not major ones, but some. Can we say that the players didn't thrive? Of course they continued to thrive. And what they've got to see now in a forest for the trees situation is this. No matter what, even if they've done everything perfectly, if they were able to play 82 games and everyone was on the same page and they're all making the best of it, they're still going to take an economic hit next season and maybe beyond because people are going to have less discretionary income. Some will be less willing to come to games, just as they'll be less willing to go to concerts and other gatherings. There's going to be an economic hit. And instead, here they are squabbling over small things and not seeing the importance of the big things.
Our poll question is over-under 75 games for baseball this season. Where do you stand?
That seems about right. That seems, if you're talking about an over-under. Could it land under that? Yeah. I take the under.
Okay.
I'm not saying it won't be 75, but it'd be very optimistic to land higher than 75, I think.
Percentage that we don't have a season this year would be what, in your opinion?
Small, but not impossible. 10%, 20%.
Yeah. It's just, the clock is ticking, and it feels like we set these arbitrary dates and go, okay, if you don't start by now, and then you don't start by now. I don't know if you don't start by now that it truly means if you don't start by now that you won't get a season in, because you're going to get dwarfed by, hockey coming back, golf is coming back, soccer's back. You're going to have the NBA coming back in the postseason. Then you got college and the NFL. And baseball gets lost usually in those months anyways. They have their sweet spot usually in, July or June and July or July and August here. And that's dangerous too if you come back and you're not relevant after everything that you've gone through.
Yeah, they could have had it if they did it in a way that seemed as if they were on the same page, as we said. They could have had the stage to themselves among team sports for a while, and that would have been a boost. And the owners are very keen on finishing before going deep into November. They proposed a regular season that ends toward the end of September, expanded playoffs, maybe with as many as 16 teams. So it'll take a little while to get through that. But they really don't want to be playing, into Thanksgiving or, heaven forbid, into December, not just because they'd be up against other sports, but because they fear, no one knows for sure, but they fear a surge in the coronavirus and perhaps being derailed, which could happen to any sport at any time. So, they're looking at a window of getting in enough games for it to be credible, then finish with an expanded postseason and get out of the way, hopefully, before something else knocks them off course.
You ever called a game in the snow?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a baseball game, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, during the 1997 World Series, there were snow flurries and temperatures in the 30s in Cleveland. It was the Marlins against the Indians, and every game in Cleveland, our teeth were chattering up in the booth. And every game in Florida, it's like 85 degrees, complete contrast. I remember at one point, and this is the rare situation where I may have said something funnier than what Uecker was thinking of at that exact moment. He was commenting on how cold it was, and I said, I glanced down in the stands, and a half dozen of the concession people are St. Bernards. and Uecker said, this is a really nice night for a game if you're a Penguin. And then the next night, Hannah Storm and Keith Olbermann were hosting the pregame, and they came on the air with an actual Penguin on the set with them. And it wasn't Burgess Meredith or Danny DeVito.
Okay.
It was a Penguin. Good night, everybody.
Hey, thanks for joining us, Bob. Hopefully we got some movement here sometime soon with baseball.
I sure hope so.
But great to talk to you. Thank you, bud.
You too, Dan. Be well.
That's
Bye.
Bob Costas, Hall of Famer. And, of course, he spent 40 years at NBC.